Välkommen! Jag sitter här med den amerikanska psykologen och författaren Guy Winch som är här i Sverige för att träffa mig, delta i TEDx Talks och framförallt prata om sin nya bok. Och det handlar om ett väldigt aktuellt och viktigt ämne, Emotional First Aid, hur vi kan ta hand om våra känslor, vårt inre på bästa sätt. Welcome to Sweden!
Thank you very much.
Is this your first time here?
It's my first time.
Yeah, so
and I hope not my last.
No, so do I. So you're here and you came also with the first snow.
Yes. But while it's cold outside, I hope I help people learn how to be warm inside.
Yeah, good. So you're here to talk about a very important and actual subject, emotional first aid, that you also wrote a book about.
Yes.
Yeah. Why is this book so important?
I think the book is very important because we all have really strong feelings and really strong reactions, and yet when we have something happen to us physically, we know exactly what to do. If you have a cut, you know what to do. If you have a cold, you know what to do. If you sprain your leg, you know what to do. But when something happens emotionally, it's not just that we don't know what to do, which we don't. We're not even aware that there are things we can do to make the pain better, to heal more quickly, to make sure things don't get worse. And there's a lot of science that psychologists have done over the last years about these very basic emotional daily experiences, only there's no way, or there hasn't been, a way to bring this science to the public, to actual people. So, because no one is going to the library to read scientific journals, most people don't. Yeah. And so I wrote the book to be able to tell people, okay, now we actually know when you get rejected, when you have a failure, when you feel guilty or lonely, there are steps you can take to feel better, to make sure it doesn't get worse, and here are these steps.
Yes. We're sitting here at the table with some happy tea and some sweets.
Yes.
And food is, for me and for many people, food is equal with love. But there is a backside of food. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Because you wrote some very interesting things in your book.
Yes, I think that often people use food to deal with emotions. And I'm not just talking about eating disorders, in which it's a very common thing that people will strongly deal with their emotions by eating. But I think that even regular people, when you know a lot of times when somebody say, oh, my boyfriend just dumped me, and so I went and I bought a lot of ice cream, or I bought the cake. In other words, the solution to that emotional problem was to eat, and it's comfort food, and so the comfort is there. But the fact that you had the ice cream or the cake doesn't mean you still won't feel hurt the next day. It doesn't mean your self-esteem won't still be bruised. It doesn't mean that you still don't have to do something. So we're using food because we don't have other tools.
So what else would we do? Instead of taking out the ice cream and the cookies, what can we do?
So first of all, take out a little ice cream and cookies, that's fine. Just don't just do ice cream. If it's all about the ice cream, that's the problem. But in general, this is why I wrote the book, because there's a lot we can do. You first of all have to be able to assess in what way you feel injured. The next morning and you're feeling better, perhaps you don't need much more than a little bit of ice cream. But for many people, they wake up the next morning and the morning after that, and 3 weeks later still feeling upset. Clearly there's an emotional wound there that you actually have to try and treat, and you can. And so the book helps people understand what is the wound that I have, and what can I do about it to make it feel better.
But how do I know? How do people know if they are emotional injured? How can we know?
So in the book I try and give guidelines, but just in a very, very general way. When something happens like a rejection or a failure or something like that, it's normal to feel upset. But are you getting better? Are you feeling better a day later or a week later? If you've been dating somebody for 2 months and you're upset for 6 months, that's not okay. If you've been dating somebody for 2 months and you're upset for 2 weeks, but you start to feel better, that is kind of reasonable. And so it's not that we always have to do something. Often when we get a cold, it gets better by itself. but sometimes we have a cough that lasts and lasts, and then we actually have to take more action. So the idea is to see, are you starting to feel better? Like any wound, it hurts a bit at the beginning, and it should gradually feel better pretty soon. If you don't feel it's improving, or certainly if it's getting worse emotionally, if it's something that you can't shake, you're in the office and all you can think about is this thing that happened and you can't focus on your work, those are the kinds of signs that there's something there you need to address.
But is it enough to then go and read your book and practice what you write? Or should you go and talk to somebody? How should you handle it?
So I think that's a wonderful question, right? Because when it comes to our physical wounds, we kind of have a good idea. When you get a cut, most of us can look at the cut and know that needs a band-aid or that might need stitches. We can actually tell the difference. When we are sick, we can usually tell the difference between I can just rest in bed and it should be okay, as opposed to I need to go to the doctor. We don't know how to do that with emotional wounds and psychological wounds. And so at the end of every chapter in the book that I talk about, I end every chapter with, and this is when you might need to see a professional. If this happens, if you're feeling this way, if you've tried these things, or if these are the thoughts. So I really try and help people understand that for some wounds, you do perhaps need to see a professional, but I think it's always best to try with the home remedy, which in this case would be the suggestions I make in the chapter.
Yeah, but why are we so bad in taking care of? Why don't we have more knowledge in general about this?
Well, who's teaching us? In other words, to me, the problem is, and this is why I wrote the book, there's all this science and all these scientists that spend years doing all these studies and finding really interesting, amazing things, but they write them in science journals that go in the library at the university, not even in your public library, not even down the street, not in the bookstore. And so who sees that? The other scientists, and that's it. And there's no one who then goes and brings, some journalists once in a while, but even the journalists are not that interested in psychological studies. They're more interested in, the new thing about this kind of trans fat or this kind of, physical thing. But no one is actually looking at the psychological studies and saying, oh, we just discovered this. Here's what you need to know because this could be very useful. And because there's a gap like that is why I wrote the book. And the other thing is, children go to school for many years, and we have them captive in school, and we teach them all these things, the math and the history and the literature, which I think are wonderful things. But most children are not going to be using the math and the history and the literature. These things, these psychological ways of dealing, these ways of dealing with emotional wounds, everyone can use, and those are the things we don't teach, which is such a shame to me.
I think so too. Because after reading your book, it's easier to understand why people are developing phobias and different kind of abusing alcohol and food and drugs.
Right.
So it's a deep issue. And I am a mom. I have a daughter. How can I apply this? For my child from the beginning, how can I teach her this important knowledge? Because this is very abstract for a child, what you can see, but what you feel.
Right. Well, actually, it's not so abstract. I'll give you one example. And let's look at an example that every child, really most children will deal with. Let's say failure. There's a chapter in the book about failure and what to do with when you fail. Now, I'm assuming your child is very young because you look young, but she will at some point be in school. And the thing is, so when a child fails at the test, they come home and they did really badly. What most parents can do is, oh honey, it's okay, you'll do better next time. They try and comfort them. It's nice, but it doesn't teach the child about how to deal with failure.
I think that's very typical Swedish parents.
Parents all over the world, all parents. But if you actually teach the child is, okay honey, so here's the great news. When something doesn't go well, it's an incredible way to learn what you have to do differently next time. This is where the teaching happens, when things don't go well. So yes, it hurts a little bit, it's a little disappointing that you didn't do well, but now let's sit down and figure out what we need to do differently, because now we know what we need to fix. Oh, you see, you started studying only a day before, perhaps we need a day and a half. Or, oh, you know, the way you studied is you just read the chapter, perhaps you need to take notes. Or whatever the thing is, but you teach them that whenever something bad happens, great news, it'll help you figure something out going forward. And that approach, as a parent, when you teach that to a child, the child doesn't come home worried of, oh, I did badly. They come home worried like, now I need to sit down and figure out what I need to do differently. And so even that approach, because there's no judgment in it, there's no anger in it, it's just very matter of fact. This is what failure means. It gives you clues to figure out how to be successful. And in fact, people who are always successful sometimes don't learn how to deal well with failure because they've never had to figure that out.
No.
So just as an example, these are one of the tools. I'll give you one other quick example. So your child didn't get invited to the birthday party and they're upset because they didn't get invited to the birthday party. Again, most parents, oh honey, that's okay, but we love you. It's nice for the child that the parent loves them, but they're more upset that their friends don't love them. But if the parent came and said, look, it's very natural to feel hurt when you didn't get invited to the birthday party, but I'm going to call the mother of your two friends and see if they can come over this evening, you know, without saying this to the child, but to remind you that you do have friends who do love you, who do accept you, who are interested in playing with you. That will do more to soothe the child's feelings than that's okay, honey, we love you anyway.
You don't believe that avoiding things, that's not a good thing to do?
No.
No, not when it comes to anything.
Well, some things. In other words, there's some exceptions, but in general, when you are avoiding something because it makes you feel bad, or because it makes you feel anxious, or because it makes you feel worried, all that does is it makes that thing that you're avoiding seem more worrisome, and it makes you more anxious. You know, phobias develop slowly. You know, nobody starts with a phobia about an elevator, but they're in an elevator and it shudders a little bit, and then they're a little bit worried, so they take the stairs. And each time they take the stairs, in their mind, they avoided getting stuck in the elevator, although they didn't, because they wouldn't have gotten stuck in the elevator, you know. But so when we avoid things, they become scarier and scarier and scarier.
Because we start to believe in some kind of illusion.
Right, we're building it up as something that we can't cope with. And when you're telling yourself, I cannot cope with the fear of the elevator becomes very scary. As opposed to, I'll get in, I'll take deep breaths, and oh, you know what, it was okay. That reduces the fear. So avoidance in general is something that makes a situation worse most of the time rather than better.
So how can we in a best way avoid the avoidance?
Well, first of all, to be clear about that, because people in psychology in general, our tendency is to find short-term solutions which create long-term problems. And that's a great example. The short-term solution is, oh, thank goodness, I didn't have to go on the elevator. Long-term problem, there are a lot of elevators in your life that are going to make you even more anxious now. So we have to be aware in terms of our psychology that if we know that, then we can say to ourselves, it's best I take the elevator now, because now is the least scary it's going to be. If I don't take it, it only gets scarier from here on. So why not face it when it's least scary?
Yeah. Your message in the book, not least with the exercises, your message is that it's really important to not only think about it, you need to write it down. And I was just thinking that we are living in the digital era. Children are more and more using devices like this instead of handwriting. Why is it so important to write it down? And is there a difference of writing it on the computer or writing by hand?
There are certain things that writing by hand does well, but for me the importance of the writing down is there are different areas in our brain that are responsible for language expression versus written expression. When you're trying to put something in writing, it's a different area of the brain you're using as opposed to speaking. And that is the same whether you're writing by hand or typing. Written expression versus verbal expression. So the value in writing it down is the more areas of your brain are involved in giving yourself a certain message, the more comprehensive, the deeper that message goes. So if you're just thinking it, that's one layer. But if you're thinking it and you're saying it, that's another layer. And if you're thinking it and saying it and writing it, it's even a deeper layer.
And what about if you read your own essay in different, like at work, at home, out in the city, at a friend's place? Would it make it even stronger? If you see it in different places?
Because I think so, because you're associating it to different environments and different contexts. Again, so, you know, our brain works by neurons connecting and creating all the time new connections. So when you read it at home, and you read it at work, and you read it out in the country, these are different associations. We are forcing our mind to make certain connections, which will then have an impact. We don't have to wait for our mind to do it by itself.
Yeah. But it's very, I mean, it's a challenge to live today, because we are all the time exposed to so many messages, and we need somehow to create a filter of what we want to see and hear, and what we want to get influenced by.
Absolutely.
And almost everyone is using social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. How does this affect us?
I think it affects us tremendously. There is a lot of research about this. I mean, let's just look at Facebook as an example. So what most people put on Facebook is, look how great my life is. Right? So here's the picture of me on vacation, look how happy I am. Oh, here's me with my children, look how great they are. No one puts the picture of, look how terrible my child is in this picture, or this is our terrible, terrible vacation, or this is the party that I hated going to. That's not what's on Facebook. It's all the great stuff. Now, if you're not feeling great, if you're feeling lonely, or if you're feeling rejected, then when you go and look at Facebook, everyone's life is better than yours, it seems. Everyone is out there at this party. You know, people put the pictures that are, you know, no one puts a picture of an empty room. Look, that's where I am. So it gives a misleading thing.
What do you think would happen if we would start doing that?
I think it would be great.
You think so?
No one's going to do it. But I think it would be great. Because, in other words, what are you advertising there? I'm alone. Look, here's my empty sofa. In other words, it's just not something we do, but it makes people feel bad. People on social media, I used to say that in order to be rejected 15 years ago, you actually had to interact with someone. Not today. Today, all you have to do is put up your vacation pictures, and your 533 friends don't like them, and you feel rejected 533 times. And even worse, I liked her vacation pictures, so now I really feel bad that she didn't like mine. But the actual reality is, she saw them, she was just really busy, and the next time she sees you, she might say, it looks like you had such a great time on vacation. But you don't know that, and so we tend to assume the worst. Because we didn't get retweeted, they didn't like my Instagram picture or my Facebook update, and we tend to think, so no one's paying attention to me, no one likes me, as opposed to people are busy, they only check once in a while. And so it's a whole new arena of a place where we have these strong emotional responses.
But it's hard because we are social beings, all of us.
Yes.
We need to be in a social context, and we need to share, and we need people around us, and in that matter social media platforms are really great because they are connecting people. I mean, somehow this interview is because of the social media, so it's good as well. But how can we learn to pick out the good parts of the social media platforms and protect us from being hurt?
Okay, but you see, that's a wonderful question, and in it is the answer. We need to use social media wisely. We need to learn how to pick up the good parts.
It's not so innocent as some people
because
think.
you know, I mean, I'm sure you know many people who do this, who are, let's say they feel lonely, and they will, or here's a better example, you know, somebody who just, their boyfriend broke up with them, and they spend the whole day looking at the boyfriend's Facebook page going, now they're doing this, now they're dating this person. Now, what good comes of that? Other than making yourself feel really, really miserable, what possible good? Now, yes, you're very curious, but this is about using some wisdom, you know, and again, when we have physical wounds, we don't make them worse on purpose.
No.
But when we have a psychological wound, we don't have the sophistication, so we will go and look at the Facebook page and make ourselves feel miserable for absolutely no good reason. Because the best that can happen is you see nothing and then that's a nothing. But there's no good outcome. It's nothing or bad.
Yeah.
And so we have to have the wisdom to use, social media wisely and to make choices that are wise.
It's really interesting how you work, because me personally, if I have a really good day and I'm happy and I see my feed and my friends are posting all positive things, I'm really happy for them and I'm happy to have them as friends. But if I feel, for example, lonely, or I had a bad day, I have a bad mood, and I see those happy updates, it makes me feel even more lonely.
Right.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is, when you're feeling bad, don't go on Facebook.
No. Because loneliness, it's really a killer, according to you.
First of all, according to many scientists, I'm just bringing that news, but yes, loneliness is one of those things that people think of as, it's a shame they feel lonely. They don't realize that it impacts not just our psychological health, but our physical health. Loneliness, chronic loneliness, increases your likelihood of an early death by 14%. Scientists believe that the health risks of chronic loneliness are the same as the health risks of cigarette smoking. Now, cigarette packs come with warnings saying, oh, this will kill you. But loneliness comes with no warnings. People aren't aware that the minute you start to feel lonely, your immune system starts functioning less effectively. Immediately. Your blood pressure rises immediately. These are very significant things, and again, with lots of science that no one knows about.
No.
And we really need to know that, because when we feel lonely, we do need to take action. It's not one of those things that we should just let go.
No.
It's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
So part of the problem in dealing with loneliness is that it really creates a distortion in our thinking. It makes us believe that the people in our life care much less about us than they do. It makes us believe that the friends we have don't really care that much about us. We really believe that. In some studies, they asked people who weren't lonely to evaluate their friendships. Then they asked them to remember a time where they felt lonely. Then they asked them to reevaluate their friendships, and all the evaluations dropped. They were just remembering a time they felt lonely. And so when you feel lonely, part of the thing that makes it difficult to come out is that you feel that, oh, if I call a friend, they're not going to be interested in getting together. Or people will say to me, well, why should I call that friend? Because they haven't called me. And then when they call, they're so upset, or they feel so emotionally raw, they'll say, why haven't you called me for 2 weeks? And of course, if a friend calls you and says, why haven't you called me for 2 weeks? When it's not you don't feel like, oh great, let's get together. You feel like, well, But if you call and say, let's have coffee or happy tea, then they're much more likely to want to see you. So the thing is, you really have to acknowledge and understand, and this is a lot of what I explain in the chapter about loneliness. Your mindset is going to be problematic. You really have to take a deep breath, and even though it's very scary, you have to try and be positive. Somebody who's lonely will say, I don't want to go to the party because no one will want to talk to me. And then they might say, okay, well, I'll go. But when they go, they have such a bad expression on their face. They stand in the corner looking like this at everyone, and surprise, surprise, no one wants to talk to them. In their head, they're like, you see? No one wanted to talk to me. And I try and say, but look at the vibe you're putting out. Look at it's not inviting. If you go, it's a party. We're not in high school. So if you actually just walk up to people and say, oh, hello, I'm so-and-so, how do you know the host? They will chat with you. But if you stand in the corner looking really upset, why would they chat with you? So you have to take action when
but
you're
whose
lonely.
responsibility is this? Is it your own responsibility?
Yes.
Yeah. But how can we be better in treating people and make everyone involved?
I'll give you an example. I don't know if you ever had a sports injury. I have.
Yeah.
You have to do physical therapy.
Yes.
The one thing about the physical therapy, it really hurts.
Yeah.
The physical therapy, the rehabilitation really hurts. But you do it because you know you have to do it to get better. So when it's a physical injury, we're aware that sometimes it hurts. Taking off the band-aid can hurt, putting the ointment can sting. We can tolerate it because we know it's important. It's the same thing with these kinds of psychological injuries. It can hurt, it can feel scary, it can feel dangerous even when you're feeling lonely to show up at a party, and it can be difficult to put on a smile. But when you do, when you're brave and you can do that, that's when you'll start to feel better, because that's when the response will come back and you'll feel like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's the same also with dating, for example.
Ooh.
I mean, Stockholm is, there are more singles than couples in Stockholm.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Why is that? Is it because people are scared of rejection, or is it...
People
what do you think?
People are terrified of rejection. One of the interesting things about rejection is that when we look at what happens in the brain, the same areas of your brain get activated when you're rejected as when you experience physical pain. Exactly the same areas.
Yeah.
And so it is actually a really painful experience. And the one difference from physical pain is, if you think back at a time where your tooth hurt or you broke a leg, your tooth won't hurt by the memory. If you think back on a time that somebody broke your heart, you'll start to feel bad in that moment. It's not only that the pain is the same, it lasts much longer, and it can be reactivated very, very quickly. So dating, is a dangerous sport because you run the risk of getting hurt all the time. Unfortunately, there's no way around that risk. You won't meet someone unless you take that risk.
Because life is boring without it.
Life is boring without it, but also in general, if you want things in life, you have to risk not getting them, failing, getting rejected. And again, right now it's scarier for most people because they don't have any tools to apply when they do get rejected.
But how can we date in a positive way, in a healthy way, without damaging ourselves? How can we play this game in a good way?
So one of the things I suggest, in the book is there are certain things you can do to boost your self-esteem. You can use that if you get rejected. You can also use it before the date to make you be more yourself. Because if you're going to go on the date and spend the entire time sitting there and thinking, what do they think about me? Do they like me? Do they want to see me again? Do they think I'm attractive? First of all, you're not very present. You're not really going to be yourself because you're just going to be a ball of anxiety and worry. But if before the date you sit and you make a list of the things that make you a good dating prospect, that you're loyal, you're emotionally available, you're a good listener, you're supportive, you make great sweets, and let's say you write a short little essay about one of those things, then you feel, oh, you know what, I have things to offer. And then you're more likely to go on the date and just be yourself and think about, do I like the other person, as opposed to, does the other person like me? So again, there are tools you can use to make a scary, difficult situation a little less scary and difficult.
And how do we treat ourselves if we are getting rejected, if the date of our life don't call back and don't want to see us again? How do we treat ourselves?
The date of our life. Well, if it's one date, it really couldn't be that. But part of the problem is that our tendency with psychological wounds is we get an injury and then we make it worse. So most people, after they get rejected, one of the first things they do, they start thinking of all their faults and shortcomings. Well, I'm not tall enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not smart enough, I didn't have something to say there, I have this spot over here which probably they looked at and they didn't like. In other words, your self-esteem is already hurting, and then you go and make it worse by thinking of everything that's not okay about you. Now, that's a real problem because you're literally making the psychological injury worse. And so we need to be able to build ourselves up after we feel rejected. We need to be able to, and not artificially, not say I'm the best person in the world, because you don't feel like it and you're probably not the best person in the world.
You have to believe it yourself.
You then say the things that you know are true. Say that you really are good at this and this and this, that you really are a loyal person, that you are a great listener. I give great back rubs, I great cook, I can organize outings, I'm always up for something spontaneous. Think of all the things you do have to offer to build yourself up, which are true, not the artificial things like the parents again say to the children, oh, but you're beautiful, honey. Which child doesn't hear you're beautiful, honey, whether they are or not? And the children who are not, and everyone else in their environment is telling them they're not, it doesn't help that the parents are telling them you're beautiful, because they think not so much. But if the parents are telling them, what do you think you're great at? And they're reinforcing that, that has much more weight and resonance.
It has to be true.
It has to be true, or feel true.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.